After having crossed through the mountains and plantations, we arrive in Baracoa, the first city to be founded on the island by the Spanish in 1511. Due to its difficult access through the backcountry and due to the presence of pirates on the seas, this small colonial town remained withdrawn for a long time. Baracoa has preserved its original urban design established 5 centuries ago, with its wooden houses and traditions nearly as old as the city itself. The main street passes through the historical centre, where people get around on foot. We then pass before the neoclassical city hall with its columns and triangular pediment. A photo of Fidel Castro evokes his presence here. At the end of the main street, City Hall gives out onto the main square, at the centre of which stands a cathedral. Built in the 19th century, it replaced the original 16th century church, made of rammed earth and straw, which had been destroyed many times over by earthquakes, hurricanes and pirates. Its neoclassical style emphasizes the building's perfect symmetry with its 2 square-based bell towers. The interior has retained the furnishings and relics of the original church. The stained glass windows recount the island's history. One of the crosses that Christopher Columbus planted upon arriving on the island of Cuba in 1492 is displayed here. After years of neglect, the historical Cathedral of Baracoa was very carefully restored. Amidst the relaxing atmosphere of the cobblestone streets, horse-drawn carriages and children play in the alleys. The city's pride is very present. In fact, its slogan says, "Though I am the smallest city of Cuba, I will always be its first." Still in the main street, the House of Culture is a typical and traditional residence from the Spanish colonial period of the 19th century, with its wooden columns and railings, its interior patio. Within the building, period furnishings are displayed alongside contemporary artworks on exhibit. Still in the main street, one particular shop draws the eye. It's the House of Chocolate. It reminds us that the region of Baracoa is the greatest producer of cocoa on the island of Cuba. This Grand Cru produces a chocolate that is 78% pure cocoa, with an inimitable texture and bite. Cocoa arrived in Baracoa in 1688, for the climate was favourable to its production. Thanks to its excellent integration, since the 19th century, its production has become even more profitable than coffee growing. In the city, beautiful hotels established in old colonial houses welcome another one of Baracoa's specialities, music. Indeed, music enthusiasts will enjoy the local music, called changui, whose melodies echo throughout the city's streets. On the seaside, La Rosa de Baracoa Hotel is a small legendary hotel that was created by an immigrant Russian prince and his wife. Their daughter, Mima Rubenskaya, later became a dancer, hence the hotel's name La Rosa de Baracoa. Once her career ended, she converted her house into a hotel where Hollywood stars such as Errol Flynn stayed. The population's poverty and the city's configuration means that everybody here gets around in carts drawn by small horses. Tricycles also serve as taxis and allow for the cleanly transportation of people and merchandise. Baracoa is also known for the quality of its water and its beautiful beaches. Though the area cannot be easily reached, once you arrive here, you're blown away by the lush nature, of course, and especially by the beautiful deserted white sand beaches with turquoise waters sprawled out below the wild coconut and almond trees. The city is now recognized as one of the most charming vacation destinations of Cuba, thanks to the surprising diversity of its local points of interest and its rich and lively cultural scene. Pillaged and burned many times over by looters and pirates, Baracoa was later protected by fortifications that can be visited today. Many forts were built by the Spanish, like Punta Fort, the castle of Severuco, and here, Matachine Fort, built in the early 19th century. The former stronghold currently shelters a municipal museum which retraces a part of the island's history. The period of time before the arrival of the invaders and before colonization. On the outside, the defensive structures have been well preserved, and we can easily imagine Spanish garrisons pushing back pirate attacks. The other fort, El Castillo, has been transformed into a hotel. It's the best hotel in town to relax and enjoy the surrounding nature. It contains 34 rooms spread out around a beautiful pool, a delight for those who enjoy far niente. Due to its geographical location, Baracoa remained cut off from the rest of the island for a long time. It fell prey to pirates and looters for many decades. A spectacular viaduct that passes through the mountains has made the city more accessible. But since it's located at Cuba's eastern point, it has remained a small country town with a small population and rarely frequented by the tourists who now flock to the island in this time of political détente.
The city of Rome, Italy, has been at the heart of history since the time of ancient Rome, when the city ruled over Europe and the Mediterranean. In other words, the entire world as it was known at the beginning of the Common Era. Over the course of many centuries, the various governments of Rome erected numerous monuments which survived throughout the ages and now bear testimony to the past. In the city, the baths of Diocletian are the greatest baths ever built in Rome. Undertaken in 298, the construction of the baths under the emperors Diocletian and Maximus took 8 years. Occupying an area of nearly 14 hectares, these baths were also the greatest and most luxurious within the entire Roman Empire. They contained over 2,400 basins, and the main building, which spanned a length of 250 metres, could welcome nearly 3,000 people. Today, its ruins are partially covered by a church and a museum. Like all similar buildings, the baths include a calidarium for solar heating, a frigidarium where the water was cold, a tepidarium where it was tepid, a natatio to dive in the water, and many gymnasiums to relax. Everything covered in splendid mosaics. After the sack of Rome by the Goths in 410 and by the Vandals in 455, the baths ceased their activity. They suffered the same fate of all the great Roman monuments. Their stones were used over the course of many centuries to erect other buildings. Well, the tepidarium was reconverted, then recovered by the churches of St. Mary of the Angels. Today, the remaining rooms of Diocletian baths shelter one of the 4 annexes of the National Roman Museum. Here, for example, are the excavated finds from a forgotten tomb along the banks of the Tiber. It belonged to the Platorini family, who lived under the reign of Emperor Augustus in the 1st century BC. The collections exhibited under the magnificent vaults of the thermal baths include a more classical museal section. Among the exhibited frescoes, sculptures and low-reliefs, many steles retrace the worship of Mithra. This Persian god, depicted here killing a bull in order to sow the land, was adopted by the Romans in the late 1st century AD. Thanks to this deity, monotheistic worship was born here in Rome, prior to the advent of Christianity. On a scale model of this site, we can see that the church was built over the thermal baths. In the foreground, the great cloister was designed by Michelangelo around 1565. Its arcade, 80 metres long, contained a series of aligned stilts and sarcophagi, making for an outdoor viewing to the end of the museum's tour. The Circus Maximus is the greatest and oldest hippodrome of Rome. It was mainly devoted to chariot races, but it was also used for other types of performances and during triumphal processions. On the edifice, that could welcome over 150,000 people, today there remains only some elements of stonework and a small part of the stands in the southeastern corner. Built as early as the 6th century BC, it was used for performances for over 1,000 years. The first Etruscan king of Rome used this space for public entertainment, such as harness races, and for the first Roman games. The first permanent structures were developed only in the course of the 2nd century BC. If chariot races were very popular, combats between elephants and tigers against slave and prisoners of war were a source of joy for the public. The baths of the Caracalla, inaugurated in 216 AD, were the greatest and most luxurious thermal baths of the time. Their ruins still display its colossal dimensions. Baths were not centred merely on bathing. There was also a community centre with shops, tavernas, restaurants, even conference halls and work halls, as well as a library separated into 2 rooms, one containing Greek works and one for Latin works. This vast ensemble also included gardens, fountains and benches. Romans enjoyed gathering here in the late afternoon, in these rooms entirely covered with marble and richly decorated with frescoes, mosaics and bronze sculptures. After going to the changing rooms, customers went through a series of steps elaborated by doctors. First, they were engaged in physical exercise in the gymnasium to warm the body. They would partake in ball games, running and weightlifting. Those who did not enjoy physical exercise would go directly to the calidarium, which was made up of 2 areas, the warm baths and the sauditorium, a dry heat area made to make one sweat. They would then go to the tepidarium to enjoy a warm, relaxing bath. The tepidarium was meant to prepare one for the frigidarium, a cool vaulted room with cold baths. Upon leaving the baths, one could be massaged, waxed and perfumed. The thermal complex included 64 sisters of 80,000 litres each, and its water came from its very own aqueduct.
Mahabalipuram was already functioning in the time of ancient Greece. But but it has kept some beautiful traces of its glorious past. Shore Temple was the first temple to be built here, but it is no longer in activity. In fact, it is possible that it never was. The main edifice displays an 18-meter-high pyramidal structure. It is devoted to Shiva. Its surrounding wall is abundantly sculpted and topped with great sculptures of Nandi. Built with blocks of granite, the temple has been damaged over the past 12 centuries due to its location on the shore. Wind, sand, and ocean spray have severely damaged the sculptures. The temple is actually a combination of 3 sanctuaries. After the main sanctuary, the second one, which is smaller, is also devoted to Shiva. It displays the triple image of Shiva with his wife and child. The third sanctuary is devoted to Vishnu. He is seen resting on the cosmic snake. With a sanctuary of Vishnu located between the 2 sanctuaries of Shiva, the temple's configuration depicts the cohabitation between the different religious movements of the time. Further away, a lion with a recess in its chest likely served as an altar. The heart of the sanctuary contains a lingam that symbolizes Shiva and masculine energy. This standing stone is a strong symbol in Hinduism, which sometimes preaches the attainment of spirituality through sexual desire. But the city is especially known for very original works carved or excavated directly into the rock. First and foremost, this gigantic low relief called the Descent of the Ganges covers the totality of the 2 huge rocks that are 27 meters long and 9 meters high. It represents the course of the sacred river, from the heavens and the Himalayas down to earth. The central fissure that represents the river is full of aquatic creatures. The low relief depicts village life in 7th century India, notably scenes of daily life. On either side of this representation of the river, the figure of Shiva is seen surrounded by numerous divine representations. On either side of this relief, great elephants are depicted. Their interpretation is uncertain. Perhaps they represent the pillars of the universe placed in the underworld. Below the fissure is a yogi cat in a meditation pose. Careless mice dance around it. This means that one should be wary of appearances. Another interesting aspect of the site is the block of granite that displays the outline of the Descent of the Ganges relief, likely halted because the chosen rock was not suitable. Another surprising element is seen in this 250-ton rock that is balanced on a slope. Many attempts were made to destabilize it, all in vain, despite its very small base. Some see this as magic. The rock is thus worshipped as Krishna's butterball. Most of the 11 cave temples were dug from the rock using chisels and mallets. Then the columns were polished and decorated as seen here with lions. On the cave's walls, artisans engraved the reliefs. In Vara Cave, Vishnu is incarnated as a wild boar. He is depicted lifting Buddhavi, the goddess of earth, who symbolizes the elimination of humanity's ignorance. Lakshmi, the goddess of prosperity, is represented on the back wall. She is surrounded by 4 pregnant women and carries lotus flowers in her hand. Other reliefs display the victories of Vishnu, the master of the 3 worlds. But the great particularity of the site of Mahabalipuram is definitely its rathas. Their purpose is a mystery, for their construction was never completed. The ratas are 5 small temples carved in a single monolith. They date back to the 7th century. A lion, the symbol of strength, is also displayed on the site. Each of the 5 ratas is a monolith. The entirety is sculpted from a rocky outcrop of pink granite. Each rata has a different shape, square, rectangular, or absidial. Despite its primitive aspect, there's a certain architectural elegance in the pyramidal structure that rises over 3 stories. Here, the alignment reveals that they were indeed carved into the mountain, literally. The greatest construction, or rather sculpture, depicts a countryside hut with a long roof. Some believe that these represent the first stone replicas of the wooden chariots used to carry the divinities during processions. The base of the carvings were never finished and remain quite raw. We can see the premises of the decorations that were later used in the great Hindu temples of southern India. These 5 temples were named in honor of the 5 Pandava brothers, characters in the Mahabharata, the Hindu Bible. They fought against evil, and all 5 of them married the same woman. This very original site is a magnificent example of monolithic Indian architecture. Another statue of an elephant representing Ganesh, the god of knowledge and wisdom, son of Shiva and his wife Parvati. Mahabalipuram and its monuments have been listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
In the historic heart of Rio, the 15th of November Square is a great space in the central district. It dates back to a time when the former capital of Brazil was only a small colonial Portuguese city, rudimentary and badly designed, when the city's port was founded in 1565. Later, under the reign of the Portuguese Emperor John VI, Brazil obtained its independence through the Treaty of Rio de Janeiro, which was signed by Brazil and Portugal on August 29, 1825. His son, Peter I, then became Emperor of the free Brazilian nation, and his grandson followed after him. This is what the statues standing on this square recount. Then Peter II was overthrown, and the Federal Republic of Brazil was definitively proclaimed in 1889. This square commemorates the proclamation of this first republic in Rio. Not far from the square stands the 18th century building that was the residence of the governors of colonial Brazil, then that of the emperors Peter I and Peter II. It was one of the main political centres of the country, and it was here that the abolition of slavery was proclaimed in 1888. After the proclamation of the Republic in 1889, the palace suffered a series of revolutionary attacks. The properties and the goods of the royal family were seized and sold at auction, and the building was converted into the central agency of the Brazilian post office, thereby harming the various paintings and decorations which ended up being destroyed or dispersed. But since 1984, the former imperial palace was restored, and it has become a major cultural centre where many exhibitions take place. This is where all the acts for Brazil's independence were signed. Tiradentes Palace was the seat of the Brazilian Parliament from 1926 to 1960, before the capital was moved to Brasilia. Today it's the seat of the Legislative Assembly of the state of Rio de Janeiro. Built in the early 20th century in an eclectic style, its concrete facade is decked with neoclassical columns and allegorical sculptings representing independence and the Republic. The palace owes its name to Joaquim da Silva, called Tiradentes, meaning the tooth puller. A mine operator and political activist, he was executed for participating in an insurrection for Brazil's independence in 1789. Since the rise of the Republic, Tiradentes is seen as a hero and martyr. Built during the Golden Age, this palace is the symbol of the Brazilian Republic. In fact, the building was closed and the assembly dissolved during the Vargas dictatorship between 1937 and 1946. Next to the palace, St. Joseph's Church, dating back to the 19th century, is very different today from the original building, whose remains disappeared in the lootings which took place during the invasion of Rio de Janeiro by the Frenchman Duguay-Trouin in 1711. Its bells are reputed for the sound of their famous chimes, and the unusual facade arouses curiosity by its nearly civilian rather than religious aspect. Though the interior contains merely a single nave and a single choir, it displays a rich late Rococo style. The altar is topped by a portrait of the church's patron, St. Joseph. Everything from the tiles to the paintings, stained glass windows, chandeliers, furnishings and architectural details evokes colonial style, still very present in the 19th century. Numerous neo-Baroque sculptures dot the path to the altar. In Brazil, 90% of the population is said to actively worship. While Catholicism has been the country's primary religion since the arrival of Portuguese in the 16th century, today, Catholics in Rio de Janeiro account for approximately 50% of the population, but many churches built by the colonists still exist today. The Cathedral of Our Lady of Mount Carmel was built in the 18th century, and during the 19th century, it became the Royal Chapel, then the Imperial Chapel. The first emperor of Brazil was crowned beneath its vaults, and the country's first constitution was signed there in 1824. Since it had become too small to satisfy the population's needs, the new modern cathedral, built in the 1970s, led it to lose its status. Since then, it's become a simple parish church, but it remains one of the primary historical monuments of the Brazilian metropolis. In the purist Rococo style, the wood sculptings are the work of the sculptor Ignacio Ferreira Pinto, one of the colony's most famous sculptors in the 18th century. Beside the old cathedral stands the church of the Third Order of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, topped by two bell towers. It was built in 1755 in the same complex that belonged to the Carmelite order. Its facade, made of grey granite instead of the standard white rendering, is unique among the colonial churches of Rio de Janeiro. It reflects continental Portuguese style. Inside, Baroque and neoclassical styles are combined. A unique nave and choir are gilded in a very precious Rococo. The church's interior is entirely covered in wooden sculptings, and the nave's walls were decked with sculptings of the Passion of Christ. The edifice is topped by a cupola in the purest classical tradition. This church is literally full of mouldings and gildings, and not a single square centimetre is devoid of decoration. In Rio, the central district is essentially a shopping and tourist area. Traditionally, it's the centre of the city's bohemian life, especially around Lapa. Lapa is one of the liveliest areas at the end of the week, with a lot of live music in the bars and plazas. One can listen to samba, forró, and PBM, popular Brazilian music. Over the last few years, Lapa has established itself as a must-see for foreign tourists, with its old, colourful colonial houses and its lively terraces that dot the alleys.
In California, Yosemite National Park is located in the mountains of the Sierra Nevada, about 3.5 hours by car from San Francisco. Created in 1890, it is the second oldest national park in American history, after Yellowstone in the state of Wyoming. It is a mountain park whose natural diversity and varied landscape stretches out over 3,000 square kilometers. The park's Central Valley is crossed by the Merced River, which runs at an altitude of 1,200 meters. The river and weather conditions combined have eroded and shaped the granite blocks with domes, peaks, and spectacular rocky columns. At an altitude of 2,700 meters stands the park's emblem, the Half Dome, a granite block whose spherical shape is cut in half. Besides the Merced River, Yosemite numbers over 2,500 kilometers of waterways and hundreds of glacial lakes which create a massive hydrographic network. The park is populated by 80 species of mammals. Along with deer and stags, there are also red lynx, coyotes, pumas, and gray foxes, which are the main predators in the park. And the black bear, the park's emblematic animal. The park contains dozens of waterfalls that are spectacular at the end of spring, for they are fed by the melting snowcaps and glaciers. Here, Bride Veil Fall, literally the fall of the bride's veil, is among the dozen or so falls that rise over 200 meters high. Yosemite Falls are in 6th place in the category of the highest waterfalls in North America, and they are among the 20 highest in the world. Totaling a height of 740 meters, they are divided into 3 levels: the top, the middle, and the bottom. Located in Yosemite Valley, El Capitan is a 900-meter-high vertical rock formation. The summit of this rock can be reached by a hiking trail found to the east, but its other face is now a challenge for climbers. On this granite face, there are dozens of climbing routes for reaching the summit, all of them long and difficult. And it's not rare to spend more than 2 weeks to climb it with bare hands, enjoying a splendid panorama. A beautiful panorama can be seen from Washburn Point, with a view of the backside of the Half Dome, and at its feet, the glacial valley of the Merced, where the waterfalls end their course. Walking along a ridge path, we reach Glacier Point Road, which offers a vertiginous view at a height of 2,285 meters. It is undoubtedly the best spot to contemplate the emblem of Yosemite National Park, the Half Dome. After the Merced, the Tuolumne River is the second greatest waterway in Yosemite. This wooded valley attracts many visitors, for it contains a botanical treasure, giant sequoias. In the trunk of a dead sequoia, a tunnel was dug to enable carts to pass through the small forest. These trees are so old, they have become gigantic. Sequoia National Park, east of the Sierra Nevada in California, is an even more spectacular spot to admire sequoias. This park looks a lot like Yosemite, with its deep canyons, imposing granite peaks, lakes, and waterfalls, and its beautiful forest of thousand-year-old trees. This granite canyon in the Sierra Nevada, dug by the glaciers and the Kings River, measures on average 1,200 meters deep and offers dizzying views. This park, created in 1890, is renowned for its many giant sequoias, which populate the forest nestled in the valley. Beyond its height, which nonetheless reaches 80 meters on average, the giant sequoia stands out especially due to its volume. Indeed, its diameter regularly exceeds 10 meters. Here, a dead tree, fallen in 1937, blocked the road. The trunk was dug out in order to enable passage. It had a diameter of 6 meters 40 at its base, for a height of 84 meters. The giant sequoia is an endemic species of the Sierra Nevada, and it can live many thousands of years. One of the trees is believed to be 3,500 years old. The number of giant sequoias seen in the park is as impressive as their size. And among them stand 4 of the 5 greatest trees on the planet. Numerous paths lead to them and allow visitors to discover their history. The tallest of all, General Sherman, overlooks the forest atop its 83 meters. This tree is considered as the most voluminous living being on the planet, with nearly 1,500 cubic meters. The park's visitors like to be photographed at the foot of this 2,000-ton giant, like Lilliputians in front of its imposing size. Its circumference is over 31 meters, and it is over 2,200 years old, a true national monument.
Located in the territory of the West Lake, the Feilaifeng, or Peak That Flew Hither, is a vast park that shelters 6 temples set within a beautiful garden. It is a very hilly and heavily wooded park, composed of caves and hills decorated with Buddhist reliefs. Over the course of 1,000 years, more than 300 Buddhas were carved into the rock, most of them between the 10th and 14th centuries, during the Song and Yuan dynasties. It is an exceptional site due to the rarity of cave art sites in southern China. One of the 6 temples located in the park, Lingyong Temple, or the Temple of the Soul's Retreat, is a Buddhist edifice founded in the year 326 and rebuilt 16 times. The official entrance to the temple is guarded by the 4 heavenly kings, who are the guardians of the horizons and of Buddhist law in China. In the first pavilion, under a sumptuously decorated ceiling, there's another guardian whose weapon turned towards the earth indicates that the temple has no dormitories for pilgrims. At its high point, a little before the year 1000, the temple was considered one of the 10 most important in China. It was composed of a dozen buildings with several stories that sheltered more than 3,000 monks. One of the buildings is the Hall of the 500 Arhats, who are the disciples of Buddhism who have attained the highest level of wisdom. Following the floor plan, the 500 statues are distributed in the shape of a Gamidian cross or swastika, which is the symbol of eternity in China. In the center of the cross, there stands a bronze pavilion that holds 4 Bodhisattvas representing the 4 cardinal directions. The existence of a temple on this site is due to the presence of an Indian monk who came here in the year 316. He was inspired by the spiritual dimension of the landscape found here, which exuded peace and contemplation. For him, it had to be a home of the immortals, and thus he named it the Temple of the Soul's Retreat. These days, the temple is still a popular destination, both for pilgrims and tourists, and is considered one of the richest monasteries in the country, and also one of the most visited. The main building is the largest of the religious complex, and it reaches over 33 meters high. Next to its facade, the fine and tall Ligong Pagoda shelters the relics of its founder, the Indian monk Huili. The Grand Hall of the Great Sage contains many remarkable statues, including those of the 18 main arhats. To one side, the Lord who looks down is enthroned. He embodies compassion. The hall also holds the largest statue in China. This 20-meter-high Buddha is sitting on a lotus flower and is covered with nearly 3 kilograms of gold. Behind the main hall, going up into the park, here is the Hall of the Medicine Buddha, or Master Healer. He's a specialist in material and spiritual healing, and is also a protection against calamities. Along the walls, there are 12 statues of Yaksa generals, who are the guardians of the zodiac. The hall also contains a statue of the Medicine Buddha, which is supposed to calm harmful desires. Spared by the Cultural Revolution and entirely restored, Lingyan Temple is now a protected cultural and historic site, which doubles as a research center of Buddhist culture in China. Before it was destroyed by the Mongols, Hangzhou was considered the most populous city in the world from the 12th to the 14th centuries. It was then the capital of the Southern Song dynasty. This dynasty brought prosperity to China, which was coming out of the Middle Ages. This was not only the era of the first banknotes, maritime development, and the development of ports and trade, but also that of gunpowder. So China traded on its good qualities, one of which was the pharmacopoeia. To tell the truth, Hangzhou, the city itself, would be the oldest and largest pharmacy in China. So the old town has several traditional herbalist shops where you can buy plants, which are also traditional, and are freshly prepared, and have been used therapeutically for thousands of years. The building, which is several centuries old, also deserves a visit. It is a traditional building with 2 stories and a courtyard that serves as a light well. The most famous pharmacy is the unmissable and rather strange Hukingyu Tang. It has managed to retain its style of days gone by, thanks to its ancient woodwork. The building that contains the pharmacy is beautiful, with its very high ceilings and remarkable woodwork and painting. Here too, the light well bathes the area in a soft light. They have traditional medicinal plants here, like the famous ginseng and all sorts of mushrooms and roots. You can, of course, ask for a recommendation for skin or stomach problems, or even the flu. Chinese medicine, with very simple ingredients, is certainly one of the most efficient in the world. It is strongly anchored in Chinese culture, and the medicinal herbs and substances constitute a real national treasure. Located in the western Peloponnese, Olympia was a religious center located in a sacred grove of wild olive trees. The site seems to have been occupied continuously from the early 3rd millennia BC. Olympia was not a city, it was a sanctuary dedicated to Zeus. It was inhabited exclusively by the staff of the temples and the priests. After the ban on pagan cults in 393 AD, the sanctuary was abandoned and earthquakes in the 6th century contributed to the site's definitive ruin. A few beautiful remains subsist, like the Feilaifeng, which was erected on order of Philip II of Macedonia, father of Alexander the Great, in 338 BC. This round building with its Ionic columns contained the statues of the family and commemorated a military victory. There are also the remains of the thermal baths, which have not retained much from the Hellenistic period, for they were constantly and continuously extended, modified, and decorated. But the main basin has preserved its beautiful mosaics. The Heraion, devoted to Hera, the wife of Zeus, was probably the first known Doric edifice in the Peloponnese. It dates back to about 600 BC. Originally, its columns were all made of oak. They were progressively replaced by stone columns. The temple was 50 meters long, decked with 16 columns on each side. Impressive vestiges of its substructure remain. Inside stood a number of statues around the effigies of Hera and Zeus. They have disappeared, either pillaged or stocked in museums. There remain pedestals of honorific statues giving thanks to citizens for services rendered to the state. It is here in this temple that the torch of the Olympic Games was lit, and here the trophies were given to the winners of the events. For Olympia is directly and concretely associated with a world event, the Olympic Games. They were celebrated regularly here since the year 776 BC. The stadium was created in the classical period, while the monumental entrance with its corridor and arch dates back to the end of the Hellenistic period. The starting line can still be seen in the form of a line of stones in the ground, as well as the foundations of the judges' platform. Until the finish line, the distance was 192.27 meters, with a width of 28.5 meters. There were never any seats for the 45,000 spectators who gathered here to watch the events. Like the athletes, they came from everywhere throughout the known world, from Marseille to Crimea and Africa to Asia. The Olympiads took place here with an interval of 4 years between each meeting. The spirit of the Olympic Games displays the strength of the humanistic ideals of ancient Greece. A loyal competition between free men, ready to surpass themselves, whose sole ambition was to attain the symbolic reward of an olive branch. No relation to the bloody games of the Roman circus.
While the Olympiads were part of a sacred rite in a sacred sanctuary, the holiest of the holy was the Temple of Zeus, of course. It was built around 450 BC and suffered many catastrophes, notably a fire and an earthquake, which destroyed it. Like the entire site, it was found buried under a layer of alluvium many meters thick. It was a colossal 64-meter-long Doric temple, which contained one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world, a gold and ivory statue of Zeus, reaching 12.75 meters high. To the west of the Temple of Zeus are the remains of a building that has been identified as the workshop used by Phidias to create the gold and ivory statue of Zeus. Its dimensions, 32 meters by 14.5 meters, are exactly those of the temple, where the worshipped statue was to be displayed. In the 5th century, a Byzantine church was built on its ruins. Its symbols and decorations can be seen here and there. The Palestra was a small training gym. There, athletes trained in sports which do not require much room, like wrestling and jumping. Around the central space, the porticos were organized in small rooms where the athletes rubbed themselves with olive oil, or, on the contrary, covered themselves in powder and ash. All the vestiges of Olympia are now contained in the Archaeological Museum, which houses the famous pediments of the Temple of Zeus. Mythological scenes sculpted in the marble are displayed on the 2 pediments. The greatest statues in the center rise 3.15 meters. The scenes represented in the temple illustrate the origins of Olympia and the sanctuary. The west pediment represents Centauromachy, the battle of the Lapiths, a legendary people of northern Greece, against the Centaurs. This represents the victory of civilization over barbarism. In the center, Apollo tries to calm the warring parties, even though he has clearly chosen sides. The east pediment has 21 sculptures representing the preparations of the chariot races, one of the founding myths of the ancient Olympic Games. In the center, Zeus separates the 2 competitors who are accompanied by their wives and servants. No trace of the bronze chariots nor of the characters' weapons has been found.